In the heart of downtown Philadelphia, where glass-fronted skyscrapers cast long shadows over historic brownstones, Andre Thompson's life changed forever on a crisp autumn morning. A respected community volunteer and small business owner, Andre had spent the last decade building his computer repair shop from the ground up, earning the trust of his neighbors and creating opportunities for local youth through his free coding workshops. That morning started like any other. Andre left his shop early to deliver a repaired laptop to an elderly client who couldn't make the trip downtown. The streets were quiet, with only a few early morning joggers and coffee shop workers starting their day. The sun had barely risen when police cruisers suddenly surrounded his car, lights flashing and sirens wailing. Confused and terrified, Andre followed every instruction, placing his hands on the steering wheel as officers approached with weapons drawn. They were investigating a hit-and-run accident that had occurred the previous night, leaving a woman in critical condition. According to their report, witnesses had described a vehicle matching Andre's and provided a partial license plate number. Despite Andre's protests and his solid alibi, he had been hosting a community meeting at his shop during the time of the accident. With dozens of witnesses, the detective in charge seemed determined to build a case against him. Security camera footage from his shop mysteriously disappeared from police evidence, and several witness statements supporting his whereabouts were overlooked. The local media caught wind of the story, and soon Andre's face was plastered across news channels and social media platforms. The coverage painted him as a flight risk with a fictional criminal history, never mentioning his years of community service or the numerous character witnesses willing to testify on his behalf. As Andre sat in his cell, his court-appointed attorney seemed overwhelmed and disinterested, barely spending time to review the evidence. The prosecution moved quickly, pushing for a speedy trial while public opinion turned against Andre. His business suffered, and his savings dwindled as legal fees mounted. But fate had other plans. A young journalism student named Rachel Chen, interning at a local newspaper, noticed inconsistencies in the police reports. The victim's name had been kept unusually confidential, and certain details about the accident scene didn't add up. Rachel began digging deeper, convinced there was more to the story than met the eye. Through meticulous research and countless interviews, Rachel discovered that the hit-and-run victim was Catherine Morris, the former Secretary of State Senator William Burke. More importantly, she had been carrying documents the night of the accident, documents that contained evidence of a massive kickback scheme involving the senator and several prominent real estate developers. The truth began to unravel like a loose thread. The real perpetrator wasn't Andre but someone connected to Senator Burke's inner circle. The accident wasn't random, it was an attempted silencing gone wrong. Catherine had been planning to expose the corruption scheme, which involved millions in misappropriated funds meant for community development projects. The investigating detectives' aggressive pursuit of Andre despite clear evidence of his innocence suddenly made sense. Phone records revealed multiple calls between the detective and Senator Burke's office in the days following the accident. The false witness statements, the missing security footage, the rushed prosecution, all were part of an elaborate cover-up. As Rachel prepared to publish her findings, she faced intense pressure to drop the story. Anonymous threats arrived at her apartment, and her editor received calls from concerned citizens, worried about the paper's advertising revenue. But Rachel stood firm, knowing that Andre's freedom and the truth about Catherine's accident hung in the balance. The story broke on a Sunday morning, sending shockwaves through the city's political establishment. Security footage from nearby buildings, which the police had claimed was unavailable, suddenly surfaced, showing a different vehicle fleeing the scene. Multiple witnesses came forward, describing how they had been pressured to change their statements about Andre's whereabouts. Public outrage grew as more details emerged about the corruption scheme. The community that had once turned against Andre now rallied behind him, demanding justice not only for him but for all the neighborhoods affected by the misappropriated funds. Local activists organized protests outside the courthouse and Senator Burke's office. After 3 months behind bars, Andre finally walked free. The charges were dropped, and investigations were launched into Senator Burke's activities and the police department's handling of the case. Catherine Morris, who had survived the accident, came forward to tell her story, providing crucial evidence that led to multiple indictments. Andre's release was bittersweet. His business had suffered, his savings were depleted, and his trust in the system was shattered. Yet he found strength in the truth and in the community that eventually stood by him. Rather than retreat from public life, he became an advocate for criminal justice reform, using his experience to fight for others wrongly accused. The scandal led to significant changes in local government and law enforcement oversight. Senator Burke and several of his associates faced federal charges, and the police department underwent a major restructuring. For Andre, Rachel, and Catherine, the experience formed an unlikely bond. Together, they established a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping wrongly accused individuals and supporting investigative journalism projects. Their story became a testament to the power of truth and the importance of never giving up, even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds. The story of Andre Thompson's wrongful imprisonment sent ripples through Philadelphia's political landscape, but the full depth of the corruption remained hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence. Rachel Chen knew she had only scratched the surface. As she dug deeper into Senator Burke's activities, a pattern of systematic abuse of power began to emerge. In the quiet hospital room where Catherine Morris continued her recovery, Rachel found an ally who had witnessed the corruption firsthand. Catherine's voice trembled as she described years of watching funds meant for community development disappear into shadow companies. They weren't just stealing money, she explained, her fingers nervously twisting her hospital blanket. They were stealing futures. The scheme was breathtaking in its scope. Senator Burke had created a network of fake construction companies, all supposedly dedicated to rebuilding struggling neighborhoods. On paper, these companies received millions in government contracts to renovate abandoned buildings into affordable housing units. In reality, most of the buildings remained empty, their windows dark and their walls crumbling. Catherine had kept meticulous records, storing them in encrypted files on her personal laptop. The night of the accident, she had finally gathered enough evidence to approach federal authorities. She remembered the black SUV appearing suddenly in her rearview mirror, its high beams blinding her. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the hospital, and Andre Thompson was being blamed for her injuries. Meanwhile, Andre's release from prison didn't mean an end to his struggles. His computer repair shop, once a bustling community hub, stood nearly empty. Regular customers had been scared away by the media coverage, and despite his exoneration, whispers and suspicious glances followed him through the neighborhood. The weight of those 3 months behind bars hung heavy on his shoulders. But Andre wasn't alone. His story had touched something deep in the community's conscience. Local business owners, many of whom had known him for years, began organizing support. They created a fund to help him rebuild his business and started a social media campaign to share the truth about his character and contributions to the neighborhood. Rachel's investigation revealed a disturbing connection between the police department and Senator Burke's operation. Detective James Reynolds, who had led Andre's arrest, had a brother-in-law who served as the financial controller for one of Burke's shadow companies. Bank records showed suspicious transfers coinciding with major police investigations that had been mysteriously dropped. The corruption had spread its roots deep into the city's infrastructure. Building inspectors had been paid to overlook violations. Zoning officials had fast-tracked permits for Burke's projects while delaying those of legitimate developers. Even some community leaders had been silenced with promises of future contracts and political support. Catherine's recovery brought its own challenges. The accident had left her with a permanent limp and chronic pain, but her determination to expose the truth only grew stronger. From her hospital bed, she began working with Rachel, providing crucial details about the key players in Burke's network. Her insider knowledge proved invaluable in understanding how the scheme had operated undetected for so long. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior clerk in the city's permits office, inspired by Andre's story and Catherine's courage, came forward with a stack of doctored paperwork. The documents showed how Burke's companies had received approvals for non-existent renovation projects, complete with forged inspections and safety certificates. As Rachel prepared to publish this new evidence, she received an unexpected visitor. A former associate of Senator Burke, racked with guilt over his role in the scheme, offered to become a whistleblower. He revealed how the hit-and-run attempt had been orchestrated, naming names and providing dates, times, and locations of crucial meetings. The impact on the community went beyond the political scandal. In neighborhoods where Burke's fake renovation projects had promised hope, residents began organizing their own renewal efforts. They formed committees to audit development projects and demand accountability from their representatives. Andre's experience had shown them the importance of staying vigilant and standing together. The city's legal community also began to stir. Several prominent attorneys offered their services pro bono to help Andre file civil rights violations claims. Others began reviewing past cases handled by Detective Reynolds, looking for similar patterns of misconduct and evidence tampering. Catherine's recovery progressed slowly, but her spirit remained unbroken. She started attending physical therapy sessions at a rehabilitation center near Andre's shop, and the two began to form a friendship built on their shared experience of injustice. Their conversations often centered on how to prevent others from facing similar ordeals. Rachel's reporting continued to expose new layers of corruption. She discovered that Burke's influence extended beyond Philadelphia, with similar schemes operating in neighboring cities. The story was no longer just about one wrongful arrest or one corrupt senator, it had become an exposé of systemic corruption that had infected multiple levels of government. As federal investigators moved in, following the trail of evidence that Catherine and Rachel had uncovered, more people began coming forward. City employees, contractors, and even other politicians offered testimony about Burke's activities. The wall of silence that had protected the corrupt system for so long was finally crumbling. For Andre, watching the truth emerge brought mixed emotions. While vindication felt good, he couldn't help but think about others who might be sitting in cells like he had, victims of similar corruption. He began using his restored computer shop as a meeting place for community organizers and reform advocates, turning his personal tragedy into a catalyst for positive change. The arrival of the FBI in Philadelphia marked a new chapter in the unfolding scandal. Dark-suited agents moved through City Hall, carrying boxes of documents and hard drives. Their presence sent a clear message: this was no longer just a local investigation. The corruption that had nearly destroyed Andre Thompson's life had caught the attention of Washington. Special Agent Lisa Patel led the federal investigation, bringing a methodical approach that contrasted sharply with the local police department's previous handling of the case. She started by reviewing Catherine Morris's recovered files, cross-referencing them with federal banking records and tax documents. The picture that emerged was staggering. Senator Burke's scheme had diverted over $50 million meant for community development. Rachel Chen found herself working alongside federal investigators, sharing her findings and helping connect dots she hadn't even known existed. Her small newspaper office became an unofficial command center, walls covered with photos and documents showing the complex web of relationships between politicians, developers, and corrupt officials. The investigation revealed that Burke's shadow companies had spread beyond real estate. They had tentacles in everything from waste management to school construction contracts. Each discovery brought new witnesses forward, people who had been silenced by threats or bought with promises of favors. The senator's empire was built on a foundation of fear and favors, and as it crumbled, those who had enabled it scrambled to save themselves. Detective Reynolds, facing multiple federal charges, agreed to cooperate. In a sealed deposition, he detailed how Burke's organization had infiltrated the police department, using a combination of bribes and blackmail to ensure cooperation. His testimony implicated several high-ranking officers and city officials, leading to a wave of resignations and arrests. For Andre, watching the investigation unfold brought a mix of satisfaction and sadness. During his regular visits to Catherine's rehabilitation sessions, they often discussed the latest developments. "It's like watching a house of cards collapse," Catherine observed one afternoon, as she worked to strengthen her injured leg. "But it's the people living in the neglected neighborhoods who paid the real price." The human cost of Burke's corruption became clearer as federal auditors traced the missing funds. Money that should have gone to after-school programs, job training centers, and affordable housing had instead filled the pockets of corrupt officials and their allies. In one particularly egregious case, funds meant for lead paint removal in public schools had been diverted to renovate Burke's vacation home. Rachel's continued reporting sparked a movement for transparency in city government. Community groups, energized by the revelations, began demanding access to development records and contract details. They organized workshops to teach residents how to read city budgets and track public spending. Andre's computer shop hosted weekly meetings where people learned to use public databases and freedom of information requests. The pressure for reform reached the state capitol, where legislators introduced bills to strengthen oversight of development projects and protect whistleblowers. Catherine, still recovering but determined to make a difference, testified before state committees, her quiet dignity and detailed knowledge making a powerful impression on lawmakers. As federal prosecutors built their case, they uncovered evidence that the hit-and-run attempt on Catherine had been orchestrated by Burke's chief of staff, Thomas Wheeler. Wheeler had hired a local gang member to scare Catherine, but the plan had gone wrong. The gang member, now in custody, revealed that he had panicked when Catherine tried to evade him, leading to the crash. The investigation's ripple effects reached surprising places. Small business owners who had been muscled out of development contracts began speaking up. City workers shared stories of being pressured to approve unsafe buildings or ignore health code violations. Each new revelation strengthened the case against Burke and his associates while highlighting the need for systemic change. Andre's experience became a rallying point for criminal justice reform advocates. His case demonstrated how easily the justice system could be manipulated when police, prosecutors, and politicians worked together to protect their interests. Legal aid organizations began using his story to push for stronger defendant rights and better oversight of police investigations. The community's response to the scandal evolved from anger to action. Neighborhood groups that had formed to support Andre now expanded their focus, creating networks to monitor local government and support other victims of corruption. They organized voter registration drives and candidate forums, determined to change the political culture that had allowed Burke's scheme to flourish. Catherine's physical recovery paralleled the city's healing process. As she grew stronger, she began speaking at community meetings, sharing her insider's perspective on how corruption corrodes public institutions. Her partnership with Andre and Rachel expanded into a formal organization dedicated to government transparency and citizen oversight. Rachel's reporting earned national attention, with major news outlets picking up the story. She received offers from larger papers but chose to stay in Philadelphia, feeling committed to seeing the story through to its conclusion. Her detailed coverage helped citizens understand the complex web of corruption while highlighting the courage of those who fought against it. The federal investigation moved methodically toward its conclusion, building an airtight case against Senator Burke and his co-conspirators. But for the people of Philadelphia, the process of reform had only begun. They had learned painful lessons about the importance of civic engagement and the cost of complacency. The question now was how to transform their outrage into lasting change. The federal courthouse in downtown Philadelphia buzzed with tension on the morning of Senator Burke's arraignment. News vans lined the streets, and protesters held signs demanding justice. Inside the packed courtroom, Andre Thompson sat quietly beside Catherine Morris, both there to witness the formal charges being read against the man whose actions had so dramatically altered their lives. Burke's appearance shocked many who remembered his once commanding presence. The former senator looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his shoulders hunched as he shuffled into court flanked by U.S. Marshals. The judge read out 37 federal charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud, and attempted murder. Burke's plea of "not guilty" echoed through the silent courtroom. Rachel Chen watched from the press gallery, her notebook open but untouched. She'd written so many stories about Burke's crimes that the charges felt like familiar verses in a dark song. But seeing him in person, facing justice, made it all feel real in a new way. Her gaze drifted to Andre and Catherine, wondering how they felt seeing their tormentor reduced to this. The prosecution's case was methodically presented over the following weeks. Special Agent Patel had built an ironclad case, with testimony from over 50 witnesses, including former associates, city officials, and victims of Burke's schemes. Each day brought new revelations about how deeply the corruption had penetrated Philadelphia's government. Thomas Wheeler, Burke's former chief of staff, proved to be a devastating witness for the prosecution. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he detailed how Burke had systematically bought influence and silenced opposition. Wheeler's testimony about ordering the hit on Catherine brought gasps from the courtroom as he described Burke's cold calculation. The senator said to make it look like an accident. He said we couldn't risk her talking. Outside the courtroom, Philadelphia was changing. Andre's computer shop had become a hub for civic engagement, hosting workshops on government accountability and community organizing. He'd installed a bank of computers dedicated to helping residents access public records and track local development projects. The shop's walls, once covered with tech posters, now displayed maps showing ongoing community initiatives. Catherine's recovery had progressed to the point where she only needed a cane for longer walks. She channeled her energy into creating a whistleblower support network, working with legal professionals to protect others who might come forward with evidence of corruption. Her first-hand experience made her a powerful advocate for strengthening witness protection programs. The trial's impact rippled through city government. The new mayor, elected on a reform platform, established an independent oversight commission to monitor development projects. Rachel was invited to serve on the commission, bringing her investigative skills and deep knowledge of how corruption had previously flourished. She accepted while maintaining her role at the newspaper, believing that transparency required both inside reform and outside scrutiny. As evidence mounted against Burke, some of his former allies began distancing themselves. Politicians who had once sought his endorsement now championed anti-corruption measures. Developers who had benefited from his schemes rushed to make public donations to community projects. The city's political landscape was transforming, though Andre and his allies remained watchful for signs of old habits returning in new forms. The defense team's attempts to discredit witnesses faltered against the weight of documentary evidence. Catherine's meticulous records, combined with the federal investigation's findings, created a clear picture of systematic corruption. Burke's lawyers tried to paint him as a victim of overzealous prosecutors and ambitious underlings, but their arguments felt hollow against the detailed paper trail. One of the trial's most powerful moments came when Andre testified about his wrongful imprisonment. He spoke without bitterness, describing instead how the experience had opened his eyes to systemic injustice. "I was lucky," he told the court. "I had people who fought for me. But how many others don't have that support? How many are still sitting in cells because someone powerful wanted them there?" The community's involvement in the trial went beyond the courtroom. Local organizations arranged transportation for residents to attend proceedings, ensuring the public seats were always filled. People wanted to witness justice being done, to see with their own eyes that power could be held accountable. Rachel's coverage of the trial earned her a Pulitzer nomination, but she found herself more focused on the stories that still needed telling. She began investigating similar corruption patterns in other cities, working with a network of local journalists to identify common schemes and warning signs. Her experiences in Philadelphia had taught her that sunlight truly was the best disinfectant. Catherine's testimony near the trial's end provided a powerful summary of the human cost of corruption. She described not just the physical trauma of the hit and run, but the emotional toll of watching public resources being stolen from communities that desperately needed them. Her voice remained steady as she detailed years of watching money meant for schools, housing, and job programs disappear into private pockets. As the trial neared its conclusion, Philadelphia itself seemed to be on trial. The evidence had exposed not just individual crimes but institutional failures that had allowed corruption to flourish. Questions about civic responsibility, oversight, and the true meaning of public service dominated public discourse. André found himself increasingly called upon to speak at community events and reform conferences. His story resonated because it highlighted both the system's flaws and the possibility of change. He always emphasized that justice required more than just punishing wrongdoers, it needed engaged citizens willing to stand up for their communities. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury in Senator Burke's trial needed only 2 days to reach their verdict. The morning they announced their decision, the courthouse plaza filled with citizens, journalists, and activists. Andre Thompson stood at the back of the courtroom, his hand resting supportively on Catherine Morris's shoulder as they waited for justice to be served. The jury foreman's voice rang clear through the hushed courtroom, "Guilty." The word repeated 32 times as Burke was convicted on nearly every count. The former senator remained stoic, but his shoulders sagged visibly with each pronouncement. The empire he'd built through decades of corruption had crumbled in a matter of minutes. For André, the verdict brought a complex mix of emotions. His own wrongful imprisonment had been vindicated, but the truth about Burke's crimes revealed a system so broken that his case seemed almost inevitable. As reporters surrounded him outside the courthouse, he focused on the future. Today isn't just about one corrupt politician facing justice. It's about changing the system that gave him power in the first place. Catherine's reaction was more personal. Years of carrying the burden of silence, followed by months of physical recovery and court appearances, had taken their toll. As the verdict was read, tears rolled down her face, not of joy or sorrow, but of relief. Later, speaking to Rachel for her coverage of the verdict, Catherine explained, "It feels like I can finally exhale after holding my breath for years." The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later drew national attention. Victims of Burke's corruption schemes were allowed to give impact statements, creating a powerful narrative of communities damaged by greed and abuse of power. Parents spoke about children attending schools with crumbling infrastructure while funds for repairs lined private pockets. Small business owners described losing everything because they refused to pay bribes for permits. Judge Eleanor Martinez's sentencing statement became a powerful indictment of political corruption. She sentenced Burke to 25 years in federal prison, ordering him to forfeit millions in assets that would be redirected to community development projects. The true victim in this case, she declared, is not just any individual, but the public trust itself. The aftermath of the verdict brought swift changes to Philadelphia's political landscape. The city council passed a comprehensive reform package that included independent oversight of development projects, protection for whistleblowers, and mandatory transparency in government contracting. The legislation became known as the Thompson-Morris Act, acknowledging the role André and Catherine's stories played in exposing the need for change. Rachel's coverage of the verdict and sentencing won her newspaper national awards, but she found herself more interested in following up on the reform efforts. She started a weekly column called Trust Watch, monitoring the implementation of new oversight measures and investigating potential violations. Her work helped ensure that the promises of reform didn't fade once the spotlight dimmed. André's computer shop evolved into something bigger than he'd ever imagined. With support from community organizations and reform-minded business leaders, he established a technology training center focused on teaching digital literacy and civic engagement skills. The center helped residents learn how to access public records, track government spending, and participate effectively in local governance. Catherine's whistleblower support network expanded rapidly after the verdict. She worked with legal professionals to create a comprehensive support system for people coming forward with evidence of corruption. The program provided legal assistance, psychological support, and practical help for those risking their careers to expose wrongdoing. "We need to make it safer to tell the truth," she often said at speaking engagements. The federal investigation's ripple effects continued to spread. Several of Burke's former associates in other cities faced scrutiny from law enforcement, leading to new investigations and arrests. The case became a blueprint for anti-corruption efforts nationwide, with other jurisdictions studying Philadelphia's reforms and implementing similar measures. Detective Reynolds, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received a reduced sentence but still faced years in prison. Before being taken into custody, he requested a meeting with Andre. In a small conference room at the federal building, Reynolds offered a tearful apology for his role in Andre's wrongful imprisonment. Andre's response was characteristically thoughtful: "I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. Now use your time to think about how to make things right." The city's healing process took unexpected forms. Community groups that had formed to support the investigation transformed into permanent civic organizations. Regular town halls and community oversight meetings became standard practice. The transparency requirements that had seemed radical during the trial became normal parts of city governance. 1 year after the verdict, Andre, Catherine, and Rachel found themselves speaking at a national conference on government accountability. Their story had become a case study in how citizen engagement, investigative journalism, and courageous whistleblowers could work together to expose corruption and create lasting change. The conference also marked the launch of their joint initiative, the Truth and Transparency Project. Funded by a combination of civil forfeiture funds from Burke's case and private donations, the project provided resources and training for communities fighting corruption across the country. Their message was simple but powerful: change is possible when people stand together for truth. Burke's appeal process dragged on, but his influence over Philadelphia had been permanently broken. More importantly, the systems that had allowed his corruption to flourish were being dismantled and rebuilt with proper oversight. The city's new development projects included genuine community input and transparent budgeting processes. 2 years after Senator Burke's conviction, Philadelphia had become a different city. The transformation wasn't just in its politics or policies, but in the way citizens engaged with their government. The seeds of change planted during the corruption scandal had grown into a robust framework of civic participation and oversight that other cities were beginning to emulate. Andre Thompson's Technology Center had expanded into 3 locations across the city, each serving as a hub for digital literacy and civic engagement. On a warm spring morning, he stood before a group of high school students, teaching them how to track local development projects through the city's new transparency portal. "Information is power," he told them, "but only if you know how to use it." The center's success had caught the attention of national organizations focused on democratic reform. Delegations from other cities regularly visited to study how technology could empower citizens to prevent corruption. Andre found himself traveling frequently, sharing his story and helping other communities establish similar programs. His wrongful imprisonment had become a powerful catalyst for positive change. Catherine Morris had fully recovered physically, though she still walked with a slight limp on rainy days. Her whistleblower support network had grown into a national organization with offices in 12 cities. She developed a comprehensive program that combined legal protection, psychological support, and practical assistance for people coming forward with evidence of corruption. "The hardest part of exposing wrongdoing isn't finding the evidence," Catherine explained to a group of potential whistleblowers. "It's finding the courage to stand alone. That's why we make sure nobody has to." Her organization had already helped expose several major corruption cases across the country, earning her recognition as a leading voice in government accountability. Rachel Chen's Trust Watch column had evolved into a full investigative team at her newspaper, with young journalists eager to learn her methodical approach to exposing corruption. She developed a reputation for fairness and thoroughness that made even her critics respect her work. More importantly, her team's ongoing scrutiny helped ensure that Philadelphia's reforms remained more than just words on paper. The Thompson-Morris Act had become a model for anti-corruption legislation nationwide. Its combination of strong oversight measures, whistleblower protections, and mandatory transparency requirements had proven effective at preventing the kind of systematic corruption that had flourished under Burke's regime. Several state legislatures had adopted similar measures, often consulting with Andre and Catherine during the drafting process. The changes weren't just institutional. Philadelphia's political culture had shifted fundamentally. Community oversight meetings, once sparsely attended, now drew engaged citizens who asked tough questions about development projects and spending decisions. Local politicians had learned that transparency wasn't just a buzzword, it was a requirement for holding office. The Truth and Transparency Project had grown beyond its founder's initial vision. With offices in Philadelphia, Chicago, and Atlanta, the organization provided resources and training for communities fighting corruption across the country. They developed a network of legal experts, investigative journalists, and civic technologists who could rapidly deploy to support local anti-corruption efforts. Andre's personal life had taken an unexpected turn when he began dating Lisa Martinez, a civil rights attorney who'd helped strengthen the whistleblower protections in the Thompson-Morris Act. Their shared commitment to justice and community service had blossomed into a deeper connection. Together, they worked to ensure that the reforms born from his wrongful imprisonment would protect others from similar injustice. Catherine's journey had led her to become a sought-after speaker on corporate and government ethics. Her quiet strength and detailed knowledge of how corruption operates made her presentations particularly powerful. She often ended them by sharing a truth she'd learned through experience: systems don't corrupt themselves. People make choices, and different choices can create better systems. The former Detective Reynolds, serving his reduced sentence, had become an unexpected ally in reform efforts. From prison, he began working with police training programs, using his experience to help officers understand how corruption corrupts not just institutions but individual consciences. His testimony about his own moral compromises became a powerful teaching tool for law enforcement ethics courses. Philadelphia's development landscape had been transformed. The shadow companies and fake projects of the Burke era had been replaced by genuine community-driven development initiatives. Regular audits and public oversight ensured that funds reached their intended destinations. Neighborhoods that had been neglected for decades finally saw real investment in infrastructure and services. Rachel's investigative team had uncovered attempts by some of Burke's former associates to rebuild their networks in other cities. Their reporting had triggered investigations in several jurisdictions, preventing the corruption from simply relocating. The team's work showed how sophisticated corruption networks had become, and how vigilance was needed to keep them in check. The city's success in fighting corruption had drawn international attention. Delegations from developing democracies visited Philadelphia to study its reforms, leading to a series of international conferences on government accountability and civic engagement. Andre, Catherine, and Rachel found themselves sharing their experiences with reform advocates from around the world. One of the most significant changes was in how the city handled development contracts. The new system, designed with input from Catherine's experience and Andre's technological expertise, made it virtually impossible to hide the kind of fraud that had characterized Burke's schemes. Every contract, payment, and inspection was publicly trackable through a blockchain-based system that Rachel's team had dubbed the Glass Pocket Initiative. The high school students who learned civic tech skills at Andre's centers represented the future of accountability. They grew up understanding that government transparency wasn't an abstract concept but a practical tool for ensuring justice. Many had started their own advocacy projects, using social media and data analysis to monitor local issues that affected their communities. 3 years into Philadelphia's transformation, new challenges began to emerge. The success of the city's anti-corruption measures had made it a target for more sophisticated schemes. Criminal networks, learning from Burke's downfall, developed subtler methods of infiltrating government contracts and development projects. This evolution of corruption required an equal evolution in oversight and detection. Andre Thompson found himself at the forefront of this new battle. His technology centers had developed advanced data analysis tools that could detect patterns suggesting corruption even when traditional red flags weren't present. "The criminals are getting smarter," he explained to a room full of civic tech developers, "so we need to stay ahead of them." One morning, a young intern at Rachel's newspaper noticed something odd in the city's contracting database. Multiple small contracts, each just under the threshold requiring additional oversight, had been awarded to different companies that all shared the same IP address when submitting their bids. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated scheme that might have gone unnoticed in the past. Rachel's team launched an investigation, working closely with Andre's tech experts to unravel the complex web of shell companies and digital footprints. The investigation revealed a new breed of corruption that operated in the gray areas of the law, exploiting loopholes in even the strongest oversight systems. The challenge wasn't just catching criminals, it was adapting the system to prevent new forms of abuse. Catherine Morris's whistleblower network proved crucial in exposing these evolved schemes. Her organization had developed a secure platform that allowed insiders to safely share information about suspicious patterns without immediately triggering formal investigations. This early warning system helped identify potential problems before they could become full-blown scandals. The Truth and Transparency Project expanded its focus to include artificial intelligence and machine learning tools for detecting corruption. Andre partnered with leading universities to develop algorithms that could analyze thousands of government contracts simultaneously, identifying subtle patterns that might indicate attempted fraud. The project became a testing ground for next-generation oversight technologies. As Philadelphia's reform model spread to other cities, new questions arose about balancing transparency with efficiency. Some developers complained that the stringent oversight requirements slowed down legitimate projects. The challenge was maintaining strong anti-corruption measures while ensuring the city could still function effectively. Rachel's reporting highlighted this tension through the story of a community center project in North Philadelphia. The development had been delayed for months due to multiple layers of required approvals, frustrating residents who desperately needed the facility. The incident sparked a citywide discussion about finding the right balance between oversight and progress. Catherine took the lead in addressing these concerns, working with city officials to streamline processes without compromising integrity. Her experience on both sides of the system, as a whistleblower and now as a reform advocate, gave her unique insight into where efficiency could be improved without creating new vulnerabilities. The city implemented a Trusted Partner program, allowing developers with proven track records of transparency to access expedited review processes while maintaining strict oversight. The program, designed with input from Andre's tech team and Catherine's organization, used advanced monitoring systems to ensure continued compliance. Meanwhile, Andre's personal life reached a milestone when he and Lisa Martinez married in a ceremony that brought together the diverse coalition of activists, journalists, and reformers who had become their extended family. The wedding, held in a community center built through the reform development process, symbolized how personal and professional lives had intertwined in the fight for justice. Rachel's investigative team faced new challenges as corruption networks became more sophisticated in their use of technology. They uncovered attempts to use cryptocurrency and offshore accounts to hide illegal transactions, leading to a series of articles that won national awards and prompted federal legislation to address these emerging threats. The high school students who had learned civic tech skills at Andre's centers began graduating and entering public service, bringing their digital native understanding of transparency and accountability to government positions. They represented a new generation of public servants who saw technology and transparency as essential tools for democracy. Catherine's work expanded to address the psychological impact of corruption on communities. She developed programs to help neighborhoods heal from the trauma of long-term disinvestment and betrayal by public officials. Corruption doesn't just steal money, she explained in a TED Talk that went viral. It steals trust, hope, and community spirit. Healing those wounds is just as important as preventing new ones. The city's success in fighting evolved forms of corruption attracted attention from international anti-corruption organizations. The United Nations invited Andre, Catherine, and Rachel to contribute to a global framework for government transparency and accountability. Their experiences in Philadelphia helped shape international standards for fighting corruption in the digital age. Philadelphia's reformed systems faced their biggest test, and a major tech company proposed a billion-dollar development project in the city. The size and complexity of the project challenged existing oversight mechanisms, requiring innovations in both technology and process. Andre's team developed new tools for real-time monitoring of large-scale projects, while Catherine's organization worked to ensure community voices weren't lost in the process. The evolution of the anti-corruption movement revealed an unexpected truth: fighting corruption wasn't just about catching bad actors, it was about creating systems that encouraged and rewarded integrity. The city's reformed contracting process had actually attracted more legitimate businesses, as companies recognized the value of operating in a transparent environment. Rachel's reporting increasingly focused on success stories, businesses that thrived under the new system, communities that benefited from genuine development, and public servants who found satisfaction in working within a culture of integrity. These stories helped maintain public support for reform efforts, even when they created short-term inconveniences. 5 years after Senator Burke's conviction, Andre Thompson stood at a podium in City Hall's renovated Assembly chamber. Behind him, a digital wall displayed real-time data about ongoing city projects, contract awards, and development initiatives, a physical symbol of the transparency revolution he had helped create. The occasion was the 5th anniversary of the Thompson-Morris Act, and the chamber was filled with faces that told the story of Philadelphia's transformation. 5 years ago, I was sitting in a cell, branded a criminal because powerful people wanted me silenced, Andre began, his voice steady. Today, I stand here not just as a free man, but as part of a movement that has changed how our city governs itself. This isn't just my story anymore, it belongs to all of us who believe that truth could prevail over power. In the audience, Catherine Morris sat beside Rachel Chen, both women now recognized nationally as pioneers in government accountability. Catherine's whistleblower protection network had expanded to 30 cities, creating a nationwide safety net for those brave enough to expose corruption. The organization had helped uncover and prevent fraud worth billions of dollars, but Catherine measured its success in changed lives rather than saved money. Rachel's investigative journalism had evolved into something broader. Her team had created a collaborative network of local newsrooms across the country, sharing resources and expertise to track corruption across state lines. The model had helped reveal several multi-state corruption schemes, proving that local journalism could have national impact when properly supported and coordinated. The anniversary event included a surprise announcement: the launch of the National Center for Government Integrity, a joint initiative combining Andre's civic tech expertise, Catherine's whistleblower protection experience, and Rachel's investigative journalism methods. The center would serve as both a think tank and a rapid response unit, helping other cities implement and adapt Philadelphia's successful reforms. Former Detective Reynolds, now released and working as a reform advocate, took the podium to share his perspective on how corruption corrupts the corrupted. His testimony about his own journey from law enforcement to criminal and back to public service provided a powerful reminder that redemption was possible when people took responsibility for their actions and worked to make amends. The city itself had become a case study in successful urban renewal. The transparent development process had initially slowed some projects but ultimately attracted more legitimate investment. Companies valued the certainty and fairness of working in a system where decisions were made on merit rather than connections. Philadelphia's economic growth had outpaced similar cities, proving that integrity could be good for business. Lisa Martinez Thompson, now a federal judge, joined her husband Andre in announcing a new initiative to help wrongfully convicted individuals rebuild their lives after exoneration. The program would combine legal support, job training, and psychological counseling, addressing the complex challenges faced by those who, like Andre, had their lives disrupted by injustice. Catherine's recovery journey had come full circle. The rehabilitation center where she had spent months learning to walk again was now part of a network of community health centers built through the reform development process. She regularly spoke to patients there, sharing her story and showing that healing, both physical and civic, was possible with proper support and determination. The high school students who had first learned civic tech skills at Andre's centers were now emerging leaders in their own right. Many had chosen careers in public service, technology, or journalism, bringing fresh perspectives and digital native understanding to these fields. They represented a generation that saw government transparency not as an ideal but as a basic requirement. Rachel's latest investigation had revealed something unexpected: cities that adopted strong anti-corruption measures were seeing improvements in public health, education outcomes, and community engagement. The data suggested that when people trusted their government, they were more likely to participate in civic life and support public initiatives. Corruption's true cost, it turned out, went far beyond stolen money. The Truth and Transparency Project had grown into an international movement, with Philadelphia serving as a model for cities around the world. Delegations from every continent had visited to study the city's systems and adapt them to their own contexts. The project's success showed that while corruption might be universal, so too was the human desire for justice and good governance. As the anniversary event concluded, Andre, Catherine, and Rachel found themselves reflecting on their unexpected journey from victims and observers to architects of systemic change. Their story had become part of Philadelphia's identity, not just as a cautionary tale about corruption, but as an inspiration for what ordinary people could achieve when they refused to accept injustice. The broader impact of their work continued to unfold in surprising ways. Companies began voluntarily adopting transparency measures similar to those required by the Thompson-Morris Act, finding that openness could be a competitive advantage. Political candidates across the country made anti-corruption pledges modeled on Philadelphia's reforms, responding to growing public demand for accountability. Senator Burke, still serving his sentence, had become a footnote in the larger story of Philadelphia's transformation. His schemes, once seemed all-powerful, now appeared primitive compared to the sophisticated oversight systems that had emerged in response. The city had not just recovered from corruption, it had evolved beyond it. Looking out over the assembled crowd, Andre concluded his speech with a reflection on the true meaning of justice. 5 years ago, we thought this story was about catching corrupt officials. Now we understand it's about something much bigger. It's about creating systems that bring out the best in people rather than enabling the worst. It's about making integrity easier than corruption, transparency more natural than secrecy. As the applause faded, Andre, Catherine, and Rachel shared a quiet moment away from the crowds. They had become more than colleagues or friends, they were partners in a movement that had transformed their city and inspired others around the world. Their personal story of trauma and triumph had become a blueprint for change, proving that even the most entrenched corruption could be defeated when people stood together for truth.